Welcome to Abiding Life Studios. Be sure to check out our unique self-test, available in our app on iOS and Android, and on our website at abidinglife.com. Take the test today and find out how God uniquely made you. Share your results with anyone, along with the capability of purchasing and gifting tests. And remember to check out our YouTube channel at Abiding Life Ministries International to watch Michael Wells training videos, including basic seminar, expanded seminar, counselor lecture training, podcasts, and more.
Hello, welcome to Abiding Life Studios. I'm Noah Wells. Today I have with me Shay Wells.
Hello.
And Steve Reinhard.
Hey, Shay. Hi, Noah.
Hey, Steve.
Hey, Steve. Good seeing you.
Good being with you.
All right, let me just start before we start the subject. Kathy Beard, she has also done, if you guys have ever been on her YouTube channel, she does Abiding Life Women's Study.
Mm-hmm.
But she just recently found out she has cancer, and she would like any prayers you guys can provide. So Kathy Beard, cancer. So if you guys can think about her, pray for her, she would much appreciate it. And she lives in Arizona. Yeah. So, all right. I just wanted to get that out of there. All right. We are going to talk about, what are we talking about?
About why we beat ourselves up so much, just as humans. We're always, maybe you don't struggle with this. I don't know. Some people don't. Some people just live their life. I just always think of people just like trotting down the street, not a care in the world. But some of us tend to beat ourselves up a lot of, I know for me, it's like, why did I say that? And then I just will lay there at night, like, why did I say that to that person? And just destroy my own little brain, all because of what I would tell anybody else, a very human thing. You did a human thing. Who cares? Move on.
So Steve, I'd like to know if you beat yourself up. I know like Shay and I are both feelers and thinkers. You're more doer side. Do you beat yourself up, or have you in the past?
Yeah. I think so. I would say so. Maybe not a lot, because I rarely make mistakes. I rarely do anything stupid. So, no. But so like yesterday, I was training with some people, and they kind of held my feet to the fire and said, like when you said that, it sounded kind of condescending and like you put down. Mm-hmm. And so I had to run, and I didn't get a chance to talk to him about it at all. And so afterwards I was feeling kind of guilty, because I really like these people, and the last thing I would want to do would be to hurt them or put them down, or treat them shabby. But I did, and I, it's true what they said, how I didn't, and I'm profoundly grateful that they told me, because otherwise I never would have known. I wouldn't have a clue how I was coming across, or I wouldn't have a clue about just what I said being that was hurtful. So I'm really glad they told me. And at the same time, I was driving across town thinking, damn, I really wish I hadn't said that. And I wish I would really, felt bad for hurting them, and talking to him like I was condescending, because I really don't like that when somebody does that with me. So instead of beating myself up, I just acknowledged that's how I'm feeling. I'm feeling kind of guilty and embarrassed and ashamed that I treated them that way. And so I just said, that's how I'm feeling. And by the time I got done with my chores, I got an email from one of the people that had held my feet to the fire. And she was just like, wow, that's really great that we can hold each other's feet to the fire.
Yeah.
And that we can like tell each other the truth. And so I guess in that way, over the years, I would have that would have bugged me about me for days or weeks but now I'm just like, I'm just going to acknowledge this. I did it. I don't have to defend myself. So I guess that's a long-winded answer to say yes.
No, I think
but not to the extent that I used to.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you is how long in the past have you beaten yourself up compared to now? And it sounds like,
Well, years in the past.
yeah, yeah. So back in the day, yeah, it used to be a long time you'd beat yourself up. Now you kind of just recognize it and go,
Yeah.
hey, I made this mistake. It's here. I'll feel the feels I need to feel and
Yeah.
move on.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, but I do think as Christians, like I've got a lot of non-Christian friends who do the same thing we do. But I
Mhm.
think as Christians, it's a little bit more challenging, and we actually have some setups in our churches and in our the way we look at the Bible
Mm-hmm.
that kind of gives us we're kind of geared, or our environments created to help us condemn ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And I think for me, I know that, yes, of course, I've made many mistakes in life. And even when it's not even directed, it can be directed somewhat towards me, but not fully. I can still take that on
Mhm.
and beat myself up over it and convince myself I don't belong in certain places, you know. But I know when I was younger, I would definitely, it was kind of weird. I'd actually beat myself up because I thought it was more spiritual to do.
Mm.
And, and I thought, man, I'm really doing this to really show God I care about this,
Mhm.
so I'm going to beat myself up over it and destroy myself. So basically to show that I really do love you, God.
Mhm.
Yeah, you're taking it seriously. You're not messing around.
Yeah, yeah, I wasn't messing around at all. Then, but what that really did to me was more or less, it would really destroy me. It would make me really go down that road of despising myself and not actually seeing God's love and forgiveness in my mess ups. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever see those guys like in that movie on the, I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Way, where they're walking on this road through Spain on a pilgrimage, and there's these people and they've got their backs are open on their shawls, and they're got these whips and they're beating themselves as they go, right? So that's what I think of when I think of beating ourselves up. Or when I was in India up on top of this temple in Palani, there were guys that were going around and they were whipping themselves, like really whipping themselves and hurting themselves. And 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 so I think it does seem to be like a really spiritual thing to do sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I remember just like those whips you're talking about, I kind of remember a thought of when I was younger and I'd mess up and I would be around people, I would say, tell myself, okay, when we get home, we really start hammering ourselves. And
Mhm.
I think that's when I really got into cutting myself, because that is like, for me, it was like the perfect punishment
Mhm.
of, man, you messed up a word. Like just simple things like that, of being at school and messing up a word and maybe hearing someone snicker or you hear someone say something about you. You go home and you go, okay, I am such a mess of a human. I'm going to cut myself because this is a true, just like that guy, the people whip themselves. It kind of sounds crazy when I talk about it now, but it made so much sense to me back then to do it.
Yeah, you deserve that punishment, right?
Yeah.
Because
Oh,
if you're
absolutely.
kind of like, I'm going to be a spiritual person and
Mm-hmm.
punish myself. I'm not going to let myself off the hook.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. So I think as Christians, we have a tendency and an environment to live in that is kind of naturally helps us lean that way. Right before we got on our podcast today, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said he just now starting to um, take care of himself,
Mm.
to treat himself well,
Oh.
and so we were talking. I said, "Man, that's just huge because, like, maybe that's one of the biggest things that a Christian could do
Mm-hmm.
would be to treat themselves well."
Yeah.
You know? And it was like that's such a like almost a foreign topic for us, is to
Mm-hmm.
treat ourselves with respect and to take care of ourselves, to actually take care of yourself, to do the things that help you live a healthy life.
Yeah. And just on that, and I know Shay had mentioned this to me today, but I'm just going to take it from her. But we were kind of talking about this podcast before, and when she said it, I was like, oh wow, that's totally what I used to think. And I used to think if I actually let myself back then, if I actually forgave myself, that was pride. So then I don't want to be prideful. So what's the opposite of that? Well, I'm just going to hammer myself and show how much I really do care about this. And yet again, it's one of those things where my belief system was off, my belief system of who God was. And I thought, I got to please him, so I'm going to beat myself up. If I actually let myself go and say, hey, that was just a mistake, amen, move on, well, now I'm prideful. So now how am I going to get rid of that? But yet again, what it did to me is honestly, it brought me to the level of just absolutely despising myself, of going back and forth, trying to please God.
Well, it's almost like, there's so many stories we're told as Christians, whether it's people in the Bible or people that have been around us. And it's like, you have to be the ultimate sacrifice. Every day you have to be a sacrifice for Christ. And so if you are not basically being the lowest of the low, you're not bringing God glory. Like God's mad at you unless you are the lowest of the low. Because if you take any sort of pride, and I'm going to use pride as a good thing, if you take any sort of pride in yourself, or like your friend was talking about starting to take care of himself, a lot of times it's like, oh, but I'm unworthy. I'm unworthy of time to exercise, and I'm unworthy of not eating McDonald's every day, or I'm unworthy of like reading a book that makes me feel happy because I have to do these things for God. And if I am sacrificing my life for God, I'm doing nothing for myself, because that is prideful, and that is not what Jesus would want for me. But then I just see it destroy so many people, of like, Jesus wants all of you. And I don't know, I think we're kind of almost conditioned to making ourselves be the lowest of the low. And just like Noah said, like forgiving yourself, I know is a topic that a lot of people don't like to talk about, but it's like, if I don't sit there and go, Shay, you lost it on your daughter last week, because I did. We got in a knockdown, drag out fight, our oldest and myself, which doesn't happen very often. But I felt awful. I was like, I am the worst mom. I've ruined her for life. The things I said to her, she's going to internalize, and she's going to just take that on. And I sat there for days, just like, I am the worst mom ever. Why did God allow me to have these children? Because I'm terrible. I had to stop myself and forgive myself for being human. Shay, you're fine. You said some things that you probably shouldn't have, but you said them. You can't take them back. What are you going to do now to move forward? And there was no pride in that or ego or anything. It was just, I have to forgive myself, because if not, I was going to start believing the lies I was telling myself, that I'm a terrible mom, and that I can never be good, and that I've ruined my children. And the more we tell ourselves these lies, I mean, we just released a booklet called The Necklace of Lies that Noah's been working very hard on. And it was like, it's this concept of, we take these lies and we own them and we wear them, and then we almost feel like sacrificial because we're wearing our lies, and that just makes us feel more spiritual. But really what it's doing is it's keeping our eyes off of Christ and keeping our eyes on those lies. And so I had to forgive myself. I had to forgive myself and release myself of being this bad mom, because it was going to destroy me. Like,
Say you mentioned being a mom, and I think a lot of women or sisters have like a double dose of this thing we're talking about, because not only do they get it from us in the church, but also you're kind of raised to say, well, the mom's job, her job description is just sacrifice.
Yeah.
Like the number one thing mom does is sacrifice.
Mhm.
And so I always, I think that's one thing that we as Christians kind of blow out of proportion. And I think for moms, it's super easy to take care of everybody else
Mm-hmm.
and never take care of themselves. And so, and then if if their kid complains or their husband complains or their grandson complains about them or what they're doing or not doing, then if they get upset, then they get like you did, they kind of whip themselves because for being a bad mom because they haven't sacrificed enough, or if they take care of themselves. I had a mom say, "Hey, I want to go to this like a writers conference, but that sounds selfish to me."
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're right too, of like, you know, and I don't want to make it just about moms, but since we're talking about it, it's so true of like, I have to give 100% of myself to everybody. Like that is what God has called me to do. My home is for everybody. I cook dinner for and I'm not complaining. Like, first of all, I love doing all those things, but the most unhappy times in my life that I've really struggled with depression, and I've really struggled with anxiety, and I've really struggled with like this self-loathing part are when I'm giving everything to everybody. Those are the times I've been at my worst. And like right now I'm in this month of January where I took all this time off of social media. I took all of this time basically backing off of everything and taking a lot off of my plate this month, because in December I was just giving, because that's what you're supposed to do. But you're right. Then one person, even just the smallest question of like, what's for dinner? I'm like, what do you mean? What's for dinner? Can you not figure out, but it only is because it brings that out in me of I'm not enough, which is also for me why I've always beat myself up, because that was also a message my whole childhood was I was never enough. I was always criticized. And so I became critical of myself and would tell myself, like, see, you're never going to be enough. Your house will never be enough. Like everything you do isn't good enough. And I would internalize that because if I said it to myself, it didn't matter if somebody said it to me because I had already said it to myself. I'm going to bring myself down, dig myself a hole in the dirt. So then if you come swinging at me, I'm like, I know. So it's just a lot of like.
Well, yeah. And if your parents said that to you, I'm sure that's how you, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is that how you saw God then be?
Very critical.
Is very critical of you and anything you did, and you had to really take that on and beat yourself up.
Yeah. Yeah. And everything, I mean, even, I know I've talked about this on podcasts before, but like I said the salvation prayer 45,000 times because I had felt like the way I said it wasn't good enough. Yeah. God wasn't going to hear me because I didn't say it right. I didn't do it right. Was I dressed okay for church? Did I speak clearly? Or did God even have time to listen to me? Because that was another thing, right? If you always feel like you're not enough, you don't feel like people care about you or like they have the time to hear or the time to sit and listen. And so there have been many times that I'm like, man, now, although now it's like the opposite. Now I'm like, who cares what I do and things, because God doesn't have time for me anyway. He's going to be critical of me anyway. So I might as well just do it. Now it's like the opposite of like, I used to beat myself up, but now I don't see it as like this rebellion because I've gone through those stages, but now it's just like a security. Like I know that I am enough in Him. So I'm not going to worry about it. I don't need to beat myself up anymore because I'm very human and God knows I'm very human and I make stupid mistakes. But on the flip side, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to beat myself up. So I think just like in the Necklace of Lies booklet that we just released, you have your voice and Satan's voice and God's voice. And so like, I think sometimes we can be like, man, Satan's really beating me down for that thing I did. Satan's in my ear because I messed up. But Satan can whisper like just a little like, hey, and that's it. And I'm just like, yeah, you're right. I am the worst person ever, you know, and we can tend to run with that too. So I think
we make his job easy.
Yeah. So I think even like we can still beat ourselves up all day long. And that's just like a us thing. So like, even if you're good with God, and even with, if it's not Satan whispering in your ear, we just beat ourselves up. It can be.
So for our listeners on the podcast, if they like recognize themselves in us and the ways that we behave now, and they have in the past, and they catch themselves, telling themselves, "Oh, I'm not enough," or I need to beat or they notice that they're kind of whipping themselves for something they've said or done or thought or looked at, or all the different things that we punish ourselves for. What would you tell somebody who says, "Oh, I'm beating myself up," or "I just noticed I'm beating myself up for talking down to those people yesterday"?
I think you answered it probably at the beginning of the podcast. Really is recognizing it and just feel the feels of that. And I mean, to me, I still beat myself up. It'll take me like 3 or 4 days till Shay finally says, "Hey, snap out of it. It's just someone's opinion. That's it. That's not who you are." And I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. And then, I can kind of start letting that go. But yeah, I think what you're saying, Steve, I think it's a good idea, is if I can start practicing, as soon as that comes into my mind and I feel it all over my whole body, and it's like, oh, I'm such a scumbag. If I can instantly just go, okay, we made a mistake, or we didn't, and I'm still going to feel it. Let's just feel the feels, like, okay, this doesn't feel great. And then see how long it kind of takes to pass. That's what I would like to see. Because, I mean, honestly, and say what you want to say about what I'm about to say, but I've even brought stuff to God and it doesn't change. Like, I know a lot of people say, well, bring it to God and then it'll be fine. Well, I think it's good to recognize God in it and invite him into it. But that's not saying he's going to then all of a sudden, poof, you're going to feel better. Sometimes he likes to have you sit in that because he is going to teach you something in that. So I have gone to God before with stuff, and then I'm still in it. Then you're like, oh man, now he's really disappointed in me because it's, and I don't think that's the point of it. I can of course go completely one way or the other, but I think he does let us sit in it sometimes to just, I'm sure, to teach us something in that.
Always.
Yeah, because it's something I always learn afterwards. But while I'm in it, I'm thinking, I'm not going to learn anything out of this. Just take it now. Or should I just quit ministry completely and start working at King, at a grocery store or something? It's like, and that's the extreme I go. I know a lot of people maybe not go to the extreme, but that's what I do. I'm just like, I'm this big of a scumbag for one little comment that someone has said, and it's like,
well, and I think too, because I know, Steve, you talked about recognizing it, and you were just talking about recognizing it. God is not going to strike you down for admitting that you messed up, or admitting that you're wrong, or admitting that you went against maybe what you feel like he had for you, or you're beating yourself up. I think sometimes, and I know I've gone through this, I grew up in a Baptist church, and it was like, even if I admit that I'm beating myself up because being mean to me was like a sin, because I have to treat, I have to live like Jesus, and that was the goal. Well, Jesus would never beat himself up. And so why am I beating myself up? He had, he created me, I'm holy. And so I would then almost like hide in shame that I was beating myself up, because I didn't want God to know that, like, he created me for a reason and I'm being mean to myself. So then I'm going to hide from God. Like, it's okay bring that to God, and it's okay to recognize it, and it's okay to be like, man, I hurt somebody, or I'm hurting myself, and to get real with yourself. And I think it's one of the hardest things to do, is to almost have like a little come to Jesus talk with yourself. Be like, what are you doing? And like I said, in December I had to, and in fact, Noah pulled it out of me really one night, was like, hey, you're actually going through this. And I was like, oh, but to have that moment with yourself of like, it's okay to admit where you're at.
Yeah, and I think it does help if you have someone who's close to you, and
It does.
and you trust that person. I know we gotta get off here in a minute,
Especially as feelers, it's nice to have someone to bounce those ideas and things off of.
Well, yeah, and I just wanted to add this real quick, like when you were going through that time of depression, and she thinks, I got to do this, this for everybody. I just stopped her and said, hey, right now, I want you to go to whatever coffee shop you want to go to, grab whatever book you like to read, and go. And I don't want you back home for 4 hours.
He kicked me out of the house.
I said, you're out. And she goes, no, I got to do this. I got to do this. I got to do that. What if this? What if that? And I said, who cares? Go.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really, you went there and was like, oh, I can't actually be here, and nothing bad happened. God didn't strike you down. And I think that's another thing, is even if you do instantly say, oh, I forgive myself, like I used to think it was pride, God's not going to strike you down either. He's in everything. He's in everything. He's always teaching us. And no matter what path we decide to take, he's always there to teach us.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question, Steve?
Yeah. So if you don't have somebody there to watch out for you, and tell you, hey, go take your favorite book, and go off and have a cup of coffee, I'd like to do that for you now. For our listeners.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you're there by yourself and you're feeling bad or lonely or critical of yourself, condemning yourself, or saying to yourself, oh, I'm so selfish, and I would say, well, go ahead, and if you like coffee, go to get coffee. If you like ice cream, go get yourself an ice cream. Go do something nice for yourself. Go do something special for just you today. I know that sounds kind of like not Christian, but if I was there with you,
that's really helpful.
I would want you to do that for yourself. And you might find that this is the most challenging and biggest step of growth you can take as a believer.
Yeah, it's hard to take care of yourself sometimes.
Well, and just
probably a lot of times.
To add on that, and we can end as well, is, go take yourself out on a little date. Like Noah said, he texted me and he's like, just go date yourself. And I had felt, because I was in I have to check all the boxes mode, I have to do all the things. Okay, then I better bring a Bible study book, or I better sit and be just with God, right? Like, then I felt like, okay, if I'm going to go date myself, I better make sure it's a spiritual date with myself. And I stopped myself, and I put in a comedy podcast, and I read a serial killer murder book, and it was amazing because in my head, having to do something spiritual was just another box I was trying to check. Yeah. And so it might sound counterproductive. It might sound, completely against God, but we are human, and sometimes we have to love ourselves in our human ways to kind of move through things. So
yeah, and I guarantee God loved when you did that.
I did. Yeah. I loved it. So I think he was happy.
I think he wants us to love ourselves. So
I think so too. All right. Thanks, Steve.
Steve, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Love you. Love you, listeners.
Yeah, listeners, go date yourself. Even if it's for an hour, even if it's for a walk, whatever, like Steve said, whatever it is that you'd like to go do it.
Go show yourself some love.
Give yourself some love. Yep.
And we love you.
So. God is in everything, everybody. All right. Love you to everyone, the listeners.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening in. If you enjoyed the message today, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any new releases. For more information about Abiding Life Ministries, visit abidinglife.com.